The brilliant glow of studio lights shone down on the sleek set of The Progressive Pulse, where freelance journalist Sarah Mitchell reigned supreme. With her sharp style and uncompromisingly progressive stance, Sarah had built a name for herself in the cutthroat world of political television. She was a fearless voice, dissecting politicians, celebrities, and cultural icons with unrelenting zeal. Her audience loved her for it, tuning in faithfully each night to watch her take down guests with biting one-liners and unabashed sarcasm. During a meeting one day, one of Sarah's producers, Emily, pitched an audacious idea, inviting Karoline Leavitt, the high-profile White House press secretary, onto the show. The room instantly buzzed with a mixture of excitement and skepticism. Karoline, a young and undeniably influential figure in politics, carried an undeniable charisma. But she was also criticized for her steadfast loyalty to the conservative administration she represented. Sarah's eyes lit up at the suggestion. This wasn't just a chance to boost ratings. It was an opportunity. A chance to expose what she saw as the outdated, frankly backward ideals Karoline embodied. For Sarah, this was a media battle she wouldn't pass up. Never one to approach a task unprepared, Sarah dove into research with a fervor bordering on obsession. She reviewed Karoline's interviews, campaign speeches, and even her social media posts, scribbling detailed notes in the margins of her outline. A smirk played on Sarah's lips as she imagined pitting her cutting-edge sharpness against Karoline's seemingly rigid, loyal demeanor. To her, this wasn't just an interview. It was a showdown, a spectacle the audience would eat up as she unleashed zingers that would make the studio erupt in laughter. Meanwhile, in a small, sun-drenched apartment on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., Karoline Leavitt received the invitation to appear on The Progressive Pulse. She sat in her living room, the formal invitation clutched in one hand, a mug of steaming green tea in the other. Her assistant, a young man named Ryan, watched her cautiously, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you sure you want to do this, Karoline?" Ryan asked, his voice tinged with worry. "Sarah Mitchell isn't someone to mess with." Karoline smiled faintly, her youthful face showing no trace of unease or doubt. "Easy or not," she replied, her voice calm and steady. "A conversation is still a conversation. They can say what they want. Truth doesn't change." Ryan wasn't convinced. He'd seen enough of Sarah's interviews to know how ruthless she could be, how she could twist words and dismantle arguments with surgical precision. "She'll come for you," he warned. "She'll definitely bring up politics, your role, even your age." Karoline shrugged, setting the invitation on the table and gazing out the window at the quiet, tree-lined streets of her neighborhood. "Let her," she said softly, a hint of steel in her voice. "Sometimes it's not about winning or losing, it's about showing up." The days leading up to the taping were a whirlwind of activity for both sides. Sarah's team meticulously crafted questions, ensuring each one dripped with sarcasm and humor, sharp enough to make the live audience roar with laughter. Their aim was clear: to turn Karoline into a political punching bag, exploiting her youth and ties to a polarizing administration. Meanwhile, Karoline went about her daily work as if nothing extraordinary was looming. She refused to rehearse or prep answers, trusting her instincts and her unwavering sincerity to carry her through whatever lay ahead. She had nothing to prove, only a truth to share. When taping day finally arrived, the studio crackled with electric energy. The audience flooded in, loyal Sarah fans alongside curious onlookers, all eager to witness the impending showdown. Backstage, Sarah rehearsed her opening monologue, her confidence unshaken, a predatory glint in her eyes. In the green room, Karoline sat calmly, sipping water and exchanging brief, reassuring words with the staff. For Sarah Mitchell, this was just another night to flex her satirical muscles and razor-sharp political commentary. For Karoline, it was a chance to share her perspective with a crowd that might never have truly heard her. Neither of them expected how this evening would transform them, or the nationwide conversation it would ignite. The electric buzz in the studio sharpened as the live audience poured in, their excited chatter blending into a hum of anticipation. The progressive pulse set gleamed under the studio lights. Its modern desk, sleek armchairs, and giant screen flashing breaking news headlines as a backdrop. Sarah Mitchell's name glowed prominently on screens around the set, a constant reminder of her magnetic pull as the show's captivating host. Sarah was in her element backstage, surrounded by her production team and assistants. She skimmed her notes one last time, a smug, almost predatory smile tugging at her lips. Her opener was biting and ruthless, packed with intellectual jabs aimed directly at Karoline Leavitt. She muttered a few lines under her breath, savoring the devastating impact they'd have. "Tonight's going down in history," Sarah told her lead writer Olivia, who nodded eagerly. "It's going to be a huge hit," Olivia replied. "Caroline's everything your audience loves to hate. Just keep it light. Don't give her too much room to push back." Sarah smirked, adjusting her microphone. "A kid like her, she won't keep up with me." Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt arrived at the studio, looking surprisingly low-key, in a sharp blazer paired with jeans. She exuded a quiet confidence that subtly turned a few heads. Her assistant, Ryan, trailed behind, still visibly uneasy about the night ahead. "Last chance to back out," Ryan said, his voice hushed as they walked down the hall to the green room. Karoline chuckled softly. "You worry too much, Ryan. It's just a conversation." In the green room, she sat calmly sipping water, watching the monitor as the show's intro kicked off. She heard the crowd cheer as Sarah's name was announced, the sound echoing through the building. Ryan hovered nearby, unable to stay still, muttering, "Look at that crowd. They're already in her pocket." Karoline glanced at the screen, watching Sarah stride onto the stage with her signature swagger. "That's her job," she said simply, leaning back in her chair. "I'm here to tell the truth. Let's see what happens." On stage, Sarah launched into her opening, her tone smooth and electric. She started with a few warm-up jokes before zeroing in on tonight's guest. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a special figure in the house tonight," she began, her voice thick with mockery. "Karoline Leavitt, the young White House press secretary, the poster child for the youth, who thinks being a mouthpiece for the establishment is how to run a country." The audience roared with laughter, some clapping enthusiastically as Sarah flashed a pleased, almost predatory grin at their reaction. She rolled on with a string of digs about Karoline's role, her loyalty to the administration, and her youth. Backstage, Karoline watched with mild amusement, her expression giving absolutely nothing away. Ryan, on the other hand, fidgeted in his seat. "She's going hard," he whispered. Karoline nodded slightly. "She's doing her thing. Let her have her moment." When Sarah finally introduced Karoline, the applause was mixed with a few scattered boos. Sarah gestured grandly as Karoline stepped onto the stage. Karoline shook her hand firmly, her face calm and composed. She nodded to the audience before sitting, earning scattered, polite claps. "Miss Leavitt, welcome to the show," Sarah started, her tone warm but edged with a hint of sharpness. "Thanks for having me," Karoline replied, meeting Sarah's jab with steady resolve. "Great crowd here." The tension in the studio was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes glinting with anticipation. "Oh, they're amazing. They love a good fight. Ready to get started?" Karoline offered a small, enigmatic smile back, replying simply, "Always." And with that, the curtain lifted on the verbal sparring match. The studio was thick with the promise of fireworks. Both women were in position, but with starkly different aims. Sarah determined to dominate, Karoline poised and calm, knowing she didn't need to prove a single thing. The air in the studio felt electrically charged as Sarah leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk, ready to strike the first blow. Karoline sat across from her, relaxed, her hands resting lightly on the chair's arms. The contrast in their energies was stark. Sarah radiated sharpness and fire, while Karoline exuded a steady, almost unnerving confidence that seemed to throw Sarah off for a split second. "So, Karoline," Sarah began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes, "you've had quite a career for someone so young, haven't you? Pretty impressive. But don't you ever think it's time to step aside for folks with more experience?" The audience snickered, clearly in Sarah's corner, relishing the thinly veiled insult. Karoline tilted her head slightly, considering the question with a thoughtful expression. "Sarah," she said, her voice clear and assured, "I've always believed a job isn't about age. It's about what you bring to it. Whether you're 27 or 70, if you've got something worth saying and doing, why hold back?" Her calm, reasoned response earned a smattering of polite applause, a subtle shift in the room's energy. But Sarah, ever the relentless interrogator, didn't let up. "Sure, the times change, right?" she pressed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I mean, you stepped into politics as the voice of a controversial administration. Honestly, it's not exactly the progressive role model for women or diversity we'd hope for today. Ever think the values you stand for are a little outdated?" The crowd laughed and clapped, relishing Sarah's sharp, pointed jab. Karoline remained unfazed, leaning back slightly in her chair, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I think it's important to remember," she started, her tone even and measured. "Every role in politics reflects the moment it exists in. It captures what people are thinking, fighting for. Some things might not fit anymore, but that's the nature of everything in life. Progress is learning from the past, not erasing it." The laughter faded as the audience mulled over her words, a sense of quiet contemplation settling over the room. Sarah, sensing the subtle shift in momentum, pivoted quickly. "Fair enough," she shrugged, a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. "But let's talk politics. You're pretty outspoken with your views, and obviously they don't sit well with a lot of folks here. Aren't you worried that kind of openness might turn off people who used to back you?" Karoline smiled faintly, locking eyes with Sarah. "I've always believed in being honest about who I am and what I stand for," she said, her voice unwavering. "If that rubs some people the wrong way, so be it. Integrity isn't about pleasing everyone. It's about sticking to your principles, even when it's not easy." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of agreement and skepticism. Sarah, determined to stay on top, leaned closer, her tone laced with mock concern. "But don't you think that kind of stubbornness could be seen as backward?" she asked. "I mean, the world's moving forward and some might say you're clinging to the past." Karoline countered smoothly. "You call it clinging. I call it standing firm. The world moves fast, Sarah. But sometimes in that rush it forgets the value of what came before." The studio fell quiet for a moment, the audience caught off guard by the simplicity and clarity of her words. Sarah faltered briefly, sensing the crowd's attention slipping, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "But surely you'd admit there's room to improve on how things used to be done," Sarah pressed, her voice light but challenging. "Of course," Karoline replied without missing a beat, her tone firm and unwavering. "There's always room to improve, but improving doesn't mean scrapping the foundation. It's building on it. You can't write a new chapter if you're too busy tearing up the old pages." The audience, once eager to cheer Sarah's barbs, now sat in quiet reflection, their initial enthusiasm visibly dampened. Even Sarah, known for her quick wit and relentless questioning, found herself momentarily at a loss. The exchange rolled on, Sarah firing pointed questions, Karoline answering with calm and thoughtful consideration. The contrast was striking. One side brimming with vigor and provocation, the other radiating quiet conviction and unwavering sincerity. Slowly, subtly, the balance on stage began to tip, and the audience, once firmly in Sarah's camp, started seeing Karoline in a new light. As the interview stretched on, Sarah's attempts at humor felt increasingly forced, while Karoline's sincerity resonated more and more deeply. This was clearly no ordinary interview, and the audience, though still unsure where they stood, couldn't deny a growing respect for the woman they had come to mock. Sarah leaned into the desk, her smile polished and practiced, as she fired off another question, her tone dripping with the sarcasm the crowd adored. This time, she zeroed in on Karoline's political roots. "Let's talk about your early days in politics," Sarah said, her voice playful but cutting. "Don't you ever think that representing a conservative administration, with its tough, divisive policies, helped fuel some pretty unhealthy ideas about power we're seeing today? The audience erupted in laughter, clapping and cheering at Sarah's perfectly delivered jab. She leaned back, soaking in the room's energy, feeling the familiar rush of control. But Karoline didn't flinch. She nodded slightly, a faint smile curling her lips as she let the laughter die down. "Sarah," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I think it's easy to look at things through today's lens and forget what they stood for back then. Those policies weren't just tough. They were about conviction, about protecting values a lot of people believed in a world that isn't always fair. If you call that unhealthy, maybe we're defining it differently." The room went quiet, the laughter and cheers replaced by a curious, almost hesitant silence. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by Karoline's composed, thoughtful response. She hadn't expected her to meet such harsh criticism with such unwavering confidence. "Fair point," Sarah said, recovering quickly. But a hint of uncertainty had crept into her voice. "But surely you'd admit some of those policies glorified confrontation, right? Don't you think that sends the wrong message, especially to younger generations?" Karoline leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped, her expression serious. "Confrontation's part of life, Sarah. It always has been," she said. "But those policies weren't about glorifying it. They were about facing it. They were about people making hard choices in a messy world. Life isn't simple or easy, and sometimes you have to square up to tough realities to protect what matters." The seriousness in her tone silenced the crowd, many nodding unconsciously, a sense of shared understanding rippling through the room. Sarah, sensing the shift in momentum, decided to pivot, trying to regain control of the narrative. "All right," she said with a forced smile, "but let's step away from the past for a bit and talk about the present. You're very outspoken with your political views. Some call them controversial. Don't you think that damages your image, alienating people who once admired you?" Karoline leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful but unshaken. "Maybe," she admitted. "But I'm not here to be liked, Sarah. I'm here to be honest. You can't please everyone, and if you try, you'll lose yourself. My views aren't there to make people happy. They reflect what I believe is right, and that's all any of us can do." Karoline finished, her voice calm but firm, a quiet strength radiating from her. For a moment, Sarah hesitated. Her usual tactic, twisting a guest's words against them, fell flat. Karoline wasn't defensive or rattled. Instead, she answered the questions with a quiet sincerity, slowly but surely winning over the room. Taking a risk, Sarah leaned in, her tone softening slightly, a hint of genuine curiosity replacing her usual antagonism. "You seem very at peace with who you are," she said. "But don't you think there's value in evolving, letting go of old ideas and embracing the new?" Karoline's gaze met Sarah's, steady and unwavering. "Of course there is," she replied. "But evolving doesn't mean abandoning your roots. It's understanding them, learning from them, and holding on to what's worth keeping. The problem with the world today is too many people want to tear everything down without thinking about what they'll build in its place." The silence that followed was profound, thick with unspoken understanding. Even Sarah, who'd built a career on dominating conversations, found herself at a loss for a response. Karoline's words hung in the air, striking a deep chord with the audience, resonating with a truth that transcended political divides. Sensing the palpable shift in the studio, Karoline glanced at the crowd, her expression softening. "Look, I get it," she said, her voice gentler now. "I'm young, and my views might feel foreign to some people here. But the thing is, life isn't always about being right. It's about being true to yourself, even when it's hard, and listening, even when you don't agree." A young woman in the front row wiped away a tear, her face a mixture of emotion. The audience, once quick to laugh and cheer at the start, now sat in quiet reflection. Even Sarah showed a flicker of humility, her usual confidence giving way to a hint of introspection. It was a rare, unguarded moment for the usually unflappable host. "Can I tell a little story?" Caroline asked, her voice cutting through the stillness like a cool breeze. A request rather than a demand. Sarah hesitated, then nodded, a flicker of genuine curiosity in her eyes. "Go ahead," she said, her tone softer than it had been all night. And as Caroline began to speak, the atmosphere in the studio transformed completely. What had started as a sparring match, a clash of ideologies, became something deeper, more human, a conversation that would leave a lasting mark on everyone present, even Sarah herself. Caroline leaned forward slightly, her youthful face thoughtful, her expression earnest. The audience listened intently, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. Sarah, usually sharp-edged and ready to pounce, softened, watching her with a mix of curiosity and surprise. This was not the Caroline she had expected. "People often look at success," Caroline began, her voice steady and natural, devoid of any pretense, "and think the journey there must have been smooth. But politics isn't easy for anyone, especially not for someone like me starting out. I didn't have anything special. Just a girl from a small town with big dreams and no clue how to make them happen." The audience chuckled lightly, drawn in by her self-deprecating humor, a sense of shared experience filling the room. Sarah raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the unexpected humility. "When I first stepped into politics," Caroline continued, "I was nobody. I was an intern, running errands, writing letters, anything to get a foot in the door. The first time I spoke to a crowd, I was terrible. They said I lacked experience, my voice wasn't commanding enough, my smile was too forced. Someone even told me, 'You'll never make it. You don't have the grit or the talent.'" The audience fell silent, completely hooked on her every word. Caroline's voice carried a weight, a lived experience that brought the story to life, not just as a distant memory, but as a palpable, relatable struggle. "I could have quit," she said, her gaze sweeping the room, connecting with individuals in the audience. "Most people would have, but I didn't stop. Not because I thought I'd make it big, but because something in me said to keep going. I worked harder, learned from every mistake, every rejection. I watched how people talked, argued, held their ground. And when opportunities didn't come, I didn't sit around waiting." Caroline pressed on, her voice filled with quiet resolve, a steely determination that resonated deeply. "I took extra jobs, figured out how to manage my time, honed my skills. Nothing glamorous, but it kept me afloat." Sarah, who'd been ready to jump in with another pointed question, found herself unable to interrupt. The sincerity in Caroline's voice, the raw honesty of her story, had melted her usual defenses. She was simply listening, truly listening, for perhaps the first time all night. "Then one day I got a shot," Caroline said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "A small campaign needed a media assistant. They didn't think much of me, but I had energy and was willing to work for peanuts. That's how I got in with my first political team. It was just a little gig back then. But to me, it was everything. A chance to prove I could do it, and I gave it everything I had." She paused, her eyes distant, as if reliving those early, challenging days, the memory still vivid and powerful. "The funny thing about opportunity is, it doesn't come with a guarantee. You get a shot, and what you do with it is up to you. I worked harder than ever, not for fame or money, but because I wanted to honor that chance." The audience was fully captivated now, the earlier jeers and cheers replaced by a quiet, respectful attention. Sarah leaned in unconsciously, her usual sharpness momentarily forgotten, her journalistic instincts replaced by a genuine human connection. "But politics," Caroline continued, her tone lowering, a hint of weariness creeping in, "it tests you. Success doesn't mean the struggles stop. They get tougher. People try to box you in, tell you what to do, what not to do. I had to fight to stay true to myself. Once I turned down a job because it didn't align with what I believed, even though I needed the money. I didn't want to become someone else's version of me. I just wanted to do good work and be honest with myself." Karoline looked out at the audience, her expression calm but resolute, her eyes shining with conviction. And you know what I learned? Integrity isn't in the big moments. It's in the small stuff. When no one's watching, you still do what's right. When you take the hard road because it's the one you should. That's what kept me going. A young man in the crowd nodded, his face pensive, his eyes reflecting a shared understanding. A middle-aged woman in the front row wiped her eyes, visibly moved by Karoline's words. Karoline's story wasn't just her story. It was a mirror for the struggles and choices anyone could relate to, a universal testament to the power of perseverance and integrity. Sarah cleared her throat, her voice softer than usual, the sharp edge completely gone. "That's quite a journey," she said, the admiration in her tone genuine and unmistakable. "But surely there were times you doubted yourself, wanted to give up." Karoline nodded, her expression easing, a hint of vulnerability flickering across her face. "Of course, everyone doubts themselves sometimes, Sarah. But the thing is, doubt's just part of it. It's not a sign to quit. It's a push to keep going. If you're honest with yourself, the path gets clear, even if it's not easy." The studio fell silent, the weight of Karoline's words settling over the room like a warm blanket. A shared moment of profound understanding. Sarah leaned back in her chair, for once unsure what to say next. Karoline had done something truly remarkable. She had turned a stage set for confrontation into a space for reflection and connection. As the interview wrapped and the crew signaled a commercial break, the audience burst into applause. Not the polite, obligatory kind after Sarah's opening monologue, but a heartfelt, spontaneous ovation for a genuinely meaningful moment. Karoline, humble as ever, nodded slightly and offered a small, grateful smile. For Sarah, a realization dawned, a profound shift in perspective. This wasn't the takedown she'd planned. It was something far more significant. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just a young spokesperson with conservative views. She was someone who'd lived, struggled, and brought a wisdom to the table that was hard to ignore, a wisdom that transcended political divides. As the applause from the break faded, the studio lights dimmed slightly, casting a more intimate glow over the set. Karoline leaned back in her chair, her demeanor calm but purposeful, as if chatting with a close friend rather than facing a skeptical crowd and a sharp-tongued host. Sarah, visibly softened after Karoline's heartfelt story of her political journey, paused briefly before steering the conversation forward. "Karoline," she began, her voice gentler, the antagonism completely gone. "You've talked a lot about your experiences in politics and staying true to yourself. But let's be real. Life isn't always that straightforward. What happens when things get so tough that resilience doesn't feel like enough? Surely even you've had moments where giving up seemed easier." Karoline nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful as she considered the question, her honesty unwavering. "You're right," she replied. "There have been plenty of times giving up would have been easier. I'm not immune to doubt or fear. None of us are. But resilience isn't about never feeling those things. It's about how you face them." The audience listened closely, their initial skepticism completely dissolved, replaced by genuine curiosity and respect. Karoline's words carried a weight, a lived experience that demanded attention, transcending the show's usual, superficial banter. "You know," Karoline continued, her voice steady, a quiet strength resonating, "I think people get resilience wrong. They think it's about being tough all the time, never breaking or bending. But it's not. Resilience is learning to bend without breaking, knowing that no matter how many times life knocks you down, you've got it in you to get back up." Sarah tilted her head, drawn in despite herself, her journalistic defenses completely disarmed. "So, where do you think that strength comes from?" she asked, her tone no longer challenging but genuinely curious, seeking understanding. Karoline smiled faintly, a soft, knowing expression. "From the little things," she said. "From the people who believe in you when you don't. From the lessons you pick up through hardship. From the mistakes that show you who you are. And most of all, from knowing your purpose, why you're doing what you're doing. Without a why, resilience is a lot harder. The audience was utterly still, the weight of her words sweeping through the room like a quiet storm. A shared moment of profound reflection. Sarah, who'd built a career on quick, cutting retorts, paused to let the message sink in, a flicker of self-awareness crossing her face. "But not everyone has a clear purpose," Sarah countered, after a beat, her voice thoughtful. "What about people who feel lost? Who don't know what they're supposed to do? How do they find their why?" Karoline leaned forward, her hands clasped, her expression earnest. "It doesn't come all at once," she said. "Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it shifts. But the key is to keep moving. Do the work, even when it feels pointless. Show up, even when it's hard. And pay attention, because the answer is often in the things you overlook. It's in the people you meet, the chances you almost miss, the challenges you think you can't handle. Purpose isn't handed to you, it's something you build bit by bit." A young man in the audience nodded, his expression pensive, his eyes reflecting a personal understanding. A woman farther back quietly wiped her eyes, clearly moved by Karoline's words, a sense of shared humanity filling the room. Sarah glanced at the crowd, noticing the emotional shift, the palpable connection that had formed. She realized Karoline wasn't just talking to her. She was speaking to everyone in the room, her words resonating with a universal truth. "That's a powerful way to look at it," Sarah admitted, her usual bravado completely gone, replaced by genuine respect. "But back to you for a sec. You faced criticism, setbacks, even big failures. How do you keep going when it feels like the whole world's against you?" Karoline laughed softly, a small but warm, genuine sound. "You keep going because you have to," she said. "Because the alternative is giving up, and that's not me. Look, Sarah, the world isn't always fair, isn't always kind, but that doesn't mean you stop fighting for what matters. You don't have to win every battle. Sometimes, just showing up is enough." The simplicity of her words cut deep, resonating with a profound truth that transcended the superficiality of political debate. Sarah, who'd initially seen Karoline as an easy target, a symbol of everything she opposed, started to see her in a completely new light. She wasn't just a young spokesperson or a representative of conservative politics. She was someone who'd lived, struggled, and learned, with a wisdom that was undeniable. A wisdom that came from experience, not ideology. As Karoline spoke, the audience's initial energy, once marked by cheers and laughs at Sarah's jabs, shifted into something quieter, more profound, more deeply human. The room hummed with emotion, a collective introspection taking hold, a shared sense of understanding and connection. "And let me add this," Karoline continued, her voice firming up, a steely determination returning. "Resilience isn't just for the big moments. It's in the small stuff. When you hold back instead of lashing out, when you choose to listen instead of argue, when you do what's right, even if no one's watching. Those little moments add up, and they shape who you are." The audience erupted in applause. Not the loud, frenzied kind from Sarah's opening, but a deeper, more genuine ovation. A spontaneous expression of respect and admiration. Karoline nodded slightly, her expression calm yet grateful, acknowledging the shared understanding. Sarah glanced at her notes, realizing the carefully prepared questions now felt utterly pointless, irrelevant in the face of such raw honesty. She folded the papers, quietly, almost unconsciously, locking eyes with Karoline. "I have to admit," she said, her voice tinged with admiration, a hint of vulnerability creeping in. "I didn't expect this conversation to go like this, but I'm really glad it did." Karoline smiled faintly, a knowing, almost gentle expression. "Life's full of surprises, Sarah," she said. "Sometimes you just have to roll with it." The cameras panned to the audience, capturing their pensive expressions, their faces reflecting a range of emotions. Admiration, introspection, even a hint of tears. In that moment it was clear Karoline's message had reached not just Sarah, but everyone in the room, Resilience, as she had so convincingly put it, wasn't about never breaking. It was about learning to bend without shattering, getting back up time and again, no matter how often life knocked you down. As the conversation deepened, Sarah shifted in her seat, no longer leaning forward with the predatory confidence of earlier. Karoline, still composed and in control, had subtly taken command of the room, not through force or aggression, but through the sheer power of her words and the unwavering sincerity of her beliefs. The audience was riveted, hanging on every sentence, their initial laughter replaced by a quiet, respectful reflection. "So, Karoline," Sarah said, her tone softer, more conversational, "you've talked about resilience and purpose. But let's dig a little deeper. You've made tough choices in your career, turning down opportunities, facing criticism for your views, going against the grain. What drives those decisions? Stubbornness or something else?" Karoline chuckled softly, shaking her head, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "People call it stubbornness," she said, "but I call it integrity. It's knowing who you are, what you stand for, and not compromising, no matter how tempting it gets." The word integrity hung in the air, a powerful, almost forgotten concept in the cynical world of modern politics. Sarah tilted her head, intrigued, her journalistic instincts re-engaged, but in a different way. Not to attack, but to understand. "But doesn't that come at a cost?" she pressed, her voice gentle, but probing. "I mean, staying true to yourself is noble, but what about the opportunities you miss, the people who turn away? Doesn't it get lonely?" Karoline paused, weighing the question carefully, her expression thoughtful. "There's always a cost," she admitted, her voice honest and unwavering. "But the cost of losing yourself is bigger. I've seen too many people, in politics and in life, give up a piece of themselves to fit in, to be liked, to get ahead. Maybe they get what they want short term, but long term, they're hollow. Because when you lose integrity, you lose what defines you." The audience fell utterly silent, her words resonating deeply, a shared understanding of the compromises we all face in life. Sarah nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the response, a flicker of self-reflection crossing her face. "Give me an example," she said, her voice gentle, her curiosity genuine. Karoline leaned forward, her hands clasped, her expression earnest. "Early in my career," she began, "I was offered a big role. It paid well, would have put me on the map, but the job meant saying things I didn't believe, backing stuff that went against my values. I needed the money, the exposure. But something in me said, this isn't right. So I turned it down." Sarah raised an eyebrow, impressed and slightly surprised. "And where'd that get you?" Karoline smiled faintly, a hint of wry amusement in her eyes. "Not great at first," she admitted. "I struggled for a while, but then another opportunity came, one that fit who I was. Because I'd stayed true to myself. I was ready when it showed up. If I'd taken the first gig, I might have made quick cash. But I wouldn't be proud of what I did. And that matters to me." The audience, once eager to cheer Sarah's barbs, now sat in quiet contemplation, their initial skepticism completely dissolved. Karoline's story wasn't just a memory. It was a lesson in holding fast to principles, despite the odds, a testament to the enduring power of integrity. "But politics doesn't exactly reward integrity," Sarah said, after a beat, her tone edged with a hint of skepticism, a flicker of her old self returning. "Don't you think that kind of idealism is a bit outdated?" Karoline leaned back, her expression calm but resolute, her voice unwavering. "Maybe," she said, "but that doesn't make it less important. Integrity isn't about being rewarded. It's about living with yourself, looking in the mirror and saying, 'I did right.' That's not outdated. It's timeless." A young woman in the audience wiped a tear, her face a mix of admiration and introspection. A man in the back nodded, pensive, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Karoline. Her words didn't just touch them. They stirred something deeper, a recognition of a fundamental human truth. Sarah shifted in her seat, feeling the weight of the moment, the palpable shift in the room's energy. Sounds like you've never doubted your choices, she said, trying to regain a bit of footing, a hint of her old journalistic challenge returning. But surely, there have been times you wondered if it was worth it. Karoline responded instantly, unflinching, her honesty unwavering. Of course there have. I'm human, Sarah. There have been moments I questioned myself, wondered if I was too stubborn or idealistic. But every time I go back to why I started. That success without integrity isn't success. It's a mirage. That always centers me. The audience clapped, not the performative, raucous roar of Sarah's opening, but a deeper, more heartfelt response, a spontaneous expression of respect and understanding. Karoline nodded slightly, her expression calm yet appreciative, acknowledging the shared connection. Sarah looked out at the crowd, noting the profound shift in the room. What had begun as a combative interview, a clash of ideologies, had become a profound reflection on integrity and self-respect, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. As the applause died down, Sarah turned back to Karoline, a genuine respect evident in her eyes. "I've got to say," she said, her voice sincere, the usual sharp edge completely gone, "you've given me, and I'm sure everyone here, a lot to think about." Karoline smiled faintly, a gentle, knowing expression. "That's all I could hope for," she said. "Life's not about convincing everyone to agree with you. It's about planting seeds, letting them figure it out." The cameras zoomed in on Karoline's face, capturing her calm, steady expression, the quiet strength that radiated from her. The moment felt almost sacred, a rare pause in the fast-paced, often superficial world of television. The audience, once primed to mock her, now sat in awe, their initial skepticism replaced by a deep, almost reverent respect for a woman living with unshakable integrity. The studio felt transformed. The early, frenetic, boisterous energy had settled into something quieter, more introspective, more deeply human. As the interview rolled on, Karoline's composure and earnest words had done what Sarah never expected, taken a crowd once firmly in her corner, and riveted them to every syllable Karoline uttered. Sarah, still composed, sensed the profound change in the air, the palpable shift in the room's energy. "You know, Karoline," she said, breaking the silence after a particularly poignant moment, her voice thoughtful. "It's easy to get caught up in the noise. The world today is loud, opinions everywhere, people shouting to be heard. But the truth's often in the quiet moments, when no one's paying attention." The audience sat still, completely drawn in by the gravity of her words, the unexpected wisdom that had emerged from the conversation. Sarah, always quick with a sharp retort, paused, letting the statement sink in, a flicker of self-reflection crossing her face. She glanced at the crew, who seemed softened too, more focused than ever on capturing the emotion of this extraordinary exchange. "I've been in a lot of loud rooms," Karoline continued, her voice low and steady, her experience evident. "Campaign meetings, press briefings, political debates. And I've learned one thing. Noise doesn't equal substance. The loudest voice isn't always the one worth hearing. Sometimes, it's the quiet ones who have the most to say." Sarah shifted slightly in her chair, the weight of Karoline's words settling over her, a profound realization dawning. For years, she'd thrived on being the loudest in the room, using her platform to amplify her views and challenge dissenters. But now, facing Karoline Leavitt, she felt a flicker of doubt, a questioning of her own approach. Have I really been listening or just waiting for my turn to talk? "So, Karoline," she said after a beat, her voice softer than usual, her curiosity now genuine, seeking understanding, "do you think the world's too noisy, too divided now?" Karoline smiled faintly, leaning back, her expression thoughtful. "I think the world's always been divided, Sarah," she replied. "We just hear it more now because of technology, social media, 24/7 news. Everyone's got a megaphone. Everyone's talking. But the issue isn't the noise. It's what you do with it. Do you add to the chaos or try to find meaning in it?" The audience murmured softly, their earlier energy giving way to a hushed contemplation, a shared reflection on the state of the world. Karoline's words didn't just reach them. They echoed, resonating with a truth that transcended political divides. "And you?" Sarah asked, her curiosity now genuine, seeking personal insight. "How do you handle the noise? You get flack for your views, your role, even your age. How do you deal with it all?" Karoline's expression softened, a hint of nostalgia flickering across her face. "You don't let it get inside," she said simply. "The world can say what it wants, but at the end of the day, your own voice is the one that matters. If you let other people's opinions define you, you lose yourself. And once that's gone, it's hard to get back." A young woman in the front row wiped a tear, her face a blend of admiration and introspection, a personal connection forming. A middle-aged man in the back nodded solemnly, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the stage, his expression thoughtful. The audience, once loud and laughing at Sarah's jabs, now seemed humbled, their expressions reflecting a deeper understanding. Sarah glanced at her notes, but they felt utterly irrelevant, superfluous in the face of such raw honesty. She folded them quietly, almost unconsciously, leaning toward Karoline, her eyes meeting hers, a genuine connection forming. "You've been through a lot of phases," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Politics change. The world changes. Do you think we're heading the right way?" Karoline paused, her gaze steady, her expression thoughtful. "I think progress matters," she said, "but progress without reflection is dangerous. You have to know where you've been to understand where you're going. Sometimes in the rush to move forward, we forget to look back and learn." The studio fell silent, save for the faint hum of the cameras, a shared moment of profound reflection. Sarah, usually quick to steer the conversation, to challenge and provoke, let this moment linger, allowing the weight of Karoline's words to settle over the room. The audience seemed spellbound, caught in the gravity of Karoline's wisdom, her words resonating with a truth that transcended the superficiality of political debate. "Look," Karoline added, her voice firm yet warm, her sincerity unwavering. "I'm not here to tell anyone how to live, but I'll say this. Don't let the noise drown out your voice. Don't let the world push you into choices you're not ready for. And don't be afraid to pause, to think, to feel, to listen. That's where you find clarity." Applause started softly, almost hesitantly, then swelled into a heartfelt, spontaneous response. It wasn't the raucous cheering of a hyped-up crowd, but the deep acknowledgement of people moved by something real, something authentic, something profoundly human. Sarah leaned back, her expression pensive, as she watched the audience, a sense of quiet understanding dawning. As the clapping faded, she turned to Karoline, a genuine respect in her eyes. "I'll be honest," she said, her voice quieter than usual, the usual sharp edge completely gone. "I came into this interview thinking I'd be the one asking the tough questions. But you've made me think about things I didn't expect." Karoline smiled faintly, a gentle, knowing expression. "That's the beauty of a good conversation, Sarah," she said. "It's not about winning or losing, it's about learning." The cameras panned to the audience, capturing their faces, some smiling, some wiping tears, others sitting still in thought, a range of emotions reflecting the profound impact of the conversation. The energy in the room had shifted entirely, transformed by the quiet power and undeniable truth in Karoline's words. Sarah glanced at Olivia, her producer, who signaled the interview was nearing its end. She turned back to Karoline, her voice carrying newfound respect, a genuine appreciation. "Thank you," she said simply, "for sharing your story and reminding us that sometimes the quiet moments matter most." Karoline nodded, tilting her head in a slight bow, a gesture of gratitude. "Thanks for having me, Sarah. It's been a memorable ride." As the cameras cut to commercial, the studio remained hushed, the weight of Karoline's words lingering long after she stopped speaking, a testament to the enduring power of authenticity and integrity. The energy in the studio shifted noticeably as the cameras stopped rolling. The usual bustle and chatter after a progressive pulse taping were absent. Instead, a gentle stillness settled in, as if Karoline Leavitt's words still hung in the space, a palpable reminder of the profound conversation that had just taken place. The audience began to rise, some whispering to each other, others lost in thought, their faces reflecting a range of emotions. Sarah sat motionless at the desk for a moment, staring at her notes. The sharp questions she'd meticulously prepared now felt hollow and irrelevant, a stark contrast to the raw honesty that had unfolded. She glanced at Karoline, who was rising from her chair with quiet confidence, her demeanor unchanged. Karoline turned to the audience, offering a small nod of acknowledgement, met with a soft wave of applause and respectful nods. As she stepped off the stage and headed backstage, a few staffers and producers approached, hesitant, their initial skepticism replaced by admiration. A young cameraman, fresh out of school, extended his hand to shake hers. "Miss Leavitt," he said, his voice slightly shaky, "I just wanted to say thanks. What you said tonight really hit me." Karoline smiled, shaking his hand firmly, yet warmly. "Glad to hear that," she said. "Life's about figuring out what matters to you and holding on to it. Don't let the world tell you otherwise." Meanwhile, Sarah retreated to her dressing room, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The show hadn't gone as she'd planned. It was something else entirely, something she hadn't anticipated. For years, she's prided herself on dominating conversations, outmatching even the toughest guests. But tonight, she'd been disarmed. Not by force or aggression, but by sincerity and truth. Sarah shut the door, sitting at her vanity. She stared at her reflection, the makeup still flawless under the harsh lights, but her expression told a different story. She felt exposed, as if Karoline's words had peeled back a layer she didn't know existed. "Am I even listening?" she whispered to herself. The question lingered, haunting in its simplicity, a challenge to her entire approach. Backstage, as Karoline gathered her things, Olivia, Sarah's producer, approached her, her usual confidence tempered, her voice softer as she spoke hesitantly. "Miss Leavitt," Olivia began, "I just wanted to say that was incredible. I've never seen a guest command the room like that." Olivia continues, her tone emotional. Karoline smiled faintly, her voice humble. "I wasn't trying to command anything," she replied. "Just sharing my truth. People listen when they're ready." Olivia nodded, her respect evident. "You definitely gave us a lot to think about." As Karoline left the studio, she spotted Ryan, her assistant, waiting by the car. Ryan looked both relieved and amazed. "I've got to say," he said, opening the car door, "I wasn't sure how it'd go, but you handled it like a real pro." Karoline slid into the passenger seat, glancing back at the studio one last time. "It's not about handling it, Ryan," she said. "It's about being yourself. The rest falls into place." The drive back to her apartment was quiet, the city lights casting long shadows on the road. Karoline gazed out the window, her expression calm but pensive. She's not one to linger on moments, but even she sensed tonight was special, that something significant had shifted. The next morning, clips from the interview flooded social media. People from all walks of life shared their thoughts, some praising Karoline's wisdom, others critiquing Sarah's initial approach. But the prevailing sentiment was respect for Karoline's unshakable authenticity and the unexpected vulnerability of the exchange. Karoline Leavitt, a lesson in integrity, trended across platforms, with users dissecting her words and recounting how they resonated with their own lives. Sarah's show, typically a draw for its humor and edge, was now being talked about for entirely different reasons. At her apartment, Sarah scrolled through the reactions, reading comments ranging from admiration for Karoline to criticism of how she handled the interview. She leaned back in her chair, her mind replaying the night. For the first time in her career, she felt uncertain. Not about her talent or skills, but about her approach. Karoline's words had forced her to confront a question she'd dodged for years. Is she using her platform to truly connect or just to dominate?